to the panel, what is it specifically that farmers need to do you think? Simon?
Well, my first comment is, ironically, at the moment, survive. I know that it sounds a little bit scary maybe, but for people up here, they will appreciate that comment. Financially, things are really tough at the moment. I know in my own circumstance, we're looking at on the order of $240,000 loss for the year. I've actually had to pull out a nest egg this year to cash flow myself. So things are tough on the ground right now. Look, longer term, yeah, the outlook is better, but we in a sector, and I'm talking everyone in this room, are going to need to find some reasonably quick solutions to some fairly big challenges.
That's an annual issue, really, isn't it? Survival, whether or not it's, you might have 2 or 3 good years, but there's...
Absolutely. And so people say we've been there before and we'll get through it and we'll go there again. Probably they're right. And unfortunately, that process is kind of a short-term process, and it makes things like succession planning exceedingly difficult. The planning's easy, but the execution becomes a nightmare. Now, I've spoken enough. Someone else.
Look, I think that we kid ourselves that we're a very efficient, productive nation. We're a commodity producing farming nation. And in a year like this, we really find out that that's true. We're at the bottom of the cycle. We do all the work, create all the value, and that value disappears down the chain. And that's what we're seeing this year. We're at the bottom of the cycle. There's a whole lot of factors coming together. But until we break out of that commodity production system, industrial farming system, we're going to suffer these. It's a cycle. We've had it before.
That comes back to what Anna said earlier today, wasn't it, about taking that step forward to own more of the value. And I mean, Synlait are doing it, Silver Fern Farms are trying to do it, but it's not happening across the scale, across the spectrum, is it? How do we change that?
So 2 things I'll just come to mind when you say that. One, stop focusing on productivity or production and actually focus on costs and reducing those. And I think in the regen type practices that we've been doing, that's what's been a real focus, and that's helping. I mean, I'm in the dairy industry, not sheep and beef, so I have to, we will, well, hopefully make a profit this year. So I can't speak on behalf of, I can only speak on behalf of where we're at. But I'm seeing, across the board, I'm hearing, when you hear people like Gay Brown and those people that've been through, they've gone through those really hard times and learned that, and they didn't have any money. They were on the brink of getting out. That's what saved them in the end, because they learned there's no money, so they had to farm their way through without money, and they made it. And that's what they did. The other thing I'd say is stop looking and listening to all the drama out there, and actually just focus on what you're doing. Throw your phone away. Don't read the newspapers. Oh, sorry, Neal. Does it mean maybe read Farmers, your paper, Farmers Weekly, but don't. We get so hung up on what possibly might happen when most of it doesn't happen, and that plays in our mind. And even though it's in the dairy industry, there's still maybe some profits to be made. That doesn't take away that people are still, have mental health problems. There's suicides happening everywhere in the youth, as well as mainly in the youth, actually. So it's a real issue we have to sort out.
Well, first of all, just on that, I went through the 80s and we stopped family farm, so we stopped putting on fertiliser, and it took us a long time to drag ourselves out of that on the far side. So we survived, and there was a lot of young go-ahead farmers that went broke. So it's a bit of a catch-22. It's not all easy if you stopped spending, because there is a catch down the track that does get a lot of people. And it's not our major source of income. We have a special deal with a Japanese suiting company. So we're trying to extract ourselves out of that commodity based system where you get paid for a good season, you get paid well, bad season you don't, whereas we get paid every year for that, and that's huge for us. Difficult to replicate on a major scale for a massive group of people, as you're pointing out with the Alliance and Saw Fern companies. They're trying desperately to do it, but they still take the bottom dollar just to ship the product when the pressure goes on, and we're stuck in that place. I mean, it comes down to expanding our trade base. That last, the deals we got with the EU and the England or the British Isles for a sheep and beef farmer were not particularly productive, I'd have to say, and pretty much put us back instead of forwards. We shouldn't be focusing on just on them. We should be focusing on places like India, where they're middle class or their upper ends in the millions or tens of millions. So we just got to be a bit more targeted where we go, probably focus a little bit more on our area and try and put ourselves into a different place with our markets.
Of course, that's very difficult in a year like this, isn't it? Even
against
for a company like Silver Fern or Synlait or those who are trying to get out of that commodity cycle.
It's not a quick fix. We're stuck in this place until we can change things slightly. But I mean, Frontier is doing it. Everybody's trying to do it, but you've got to pick your markets, I think, a little bit better, because you can't get into places like the EU with, with a lot of sheep meat. What is it for England? It was 15 years before we even got to looking for lamb. And that's now 14 years because they ratified it last year, wasn't it? And I will guarantee by the time they get down to 7 or 8 years, there'll be something else in the way of us actually entering their market. So they don't really want us.
So I do agree with all the comments. I just want to add a little bit about along the added value theme. I think it'd be far better for a country the size of New Zealand to focus on producing food instead of producing food ingredients or commodities, because it's just so hard to compete in that space against, some much larger subsidized players. But the other thing I wanted to mention is, you said, what do I think farmers in New Zealand should do? I think they should re-own the unfair advantage of pastoral farming. There's a lot of information coming from Europe or the Northern Hemisphere about how, methane is throwing our carbon budget out of whack. And I think in the end, the pastoral systems here in New Zealand, because you've been able to keep your soil carbon at a much higher level, and protect other things that other countries have not been able to do, you're not giving yourself the credit for that. And I'd like to see people owning that advantage. And John, wasn't it Alan Nation that coined the term, the unfair advantage of pastoral farming here in New Zealand? And yeah, I really believe in that.
I think farmers are under an illusion if they think they're the only ones going through hard times. Anna spoke about the need to help manufacturing in New Zealand. This downturn is one of those adversities. It's a great opportunity to change a life habit. We've contracted so much of our business outside New Zealand that we need to start introducing new words like circular economy and voluntary capitalism, the very things that built our nature here. And we have to realise we've got the second highest average minimum wage in the world. Of the top 5 countries in that group, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, and the Netherlands are all agricultural countries that have got this highest minimum wage. On top of that, when we go to build in our production costs, a salaried staff only needs to work 43% of the year. These are pretty hard facts that we're glossing over. And so we've got this opportunity but we just have to realise the people who are talking to our government behind closed doors are all descendants of slave traders.
Dylan made an interesting comment about cutting costs and in an environment like this. Do we have the knowledge and the understanding of how to actually do that? Because if you look at the company, Silver Fern Alliance, Frontier, those sorts of companies, none of those executives were around in the 80s and 90s when things went belly up. and unfortunately, they've got hair the color of mine, or like a couple here. They, you know, a lot of young farmers haven't been through this yet. So do we have the knowledge, and how do we cut those costs as farmers?
I guess where my head goes to with some of those, which were very like market orientated responses, and the question, it's like, I feel like the economy is a bit of like a red siren ahead of us that we have to pay attention to, but there's a deeper thing that farmers have to do, and some of the stuff that Wallace was alluding to, like being prepared for a resource constrained future is like really essential, and addressing the ecological crisis is like really important right now. And so if we keep on getting distracted by the market, we're going to keep on functioning in a mono system, and we really need to like prioritize biodiversity in like a true way. So we need to think sort of high level on how farmers actually can continue to function and produce food, like particularly local food, not just food ingredients for the global economy, but do that whilst also providing, like, you know, some of the solutions, letting things go to seed, annuals go to seed for a year, so that insect life does have something to prosper on, and we get, you know, the Earth's ecosystems can continue to function.
And that we can do that in this low income environment?
Well, we've got to work on solutions on how we can do that, and there is stuff like low tech and low income sort of solutions out there, and those are things that we need to possibly prioritize.
So how do we get that out to the wider farming community?
Farmers Weekly is a pretty good publication.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy what Wallace has said, and I can just be very grateful that I listened, not just heard. Christine Jones 7 years ago, and changed how we're farming, so that now when you're in these tough times, you know you can get through with really low costs, and still come out with a good profit at the other end. I'm not saying this year's going to be a profit, but you know, it's minimizing those car crashes. You know, I want to ask a question here when we're talking about what Wallace presented to us. How many people here know how much petrol per hectare we use mowing our lawns? Anyone got a guess? Yeah, and in the future, that's going to be interesting too when power prices skyrocket because we can't generate enough electricity. But anyway, petrol. Anyone else get a guess? So I've just done some back of the envelope calculations, and it's about 300 litres of petrol per hectare, equivalent. No, just equivalent. Just multiply how much big your lawn is by how much fuel you use. And my point is this: a hill country farm in the North Island, or very extensive, uses 5 litres per hectare of diesel. Our farm uses 10 litres per hectare. We were 100 litres per hectare when we were cropping. I talked to Dylan. As a dairy farm, they're using 26 litres per hectare, which is very, very low for a dairy farm. And arable farms are using 200 to 300 litres per hectare. Now, when I talk about the future and sustainability, I'll read straight out of the Collins Dictionary, because this word sustainability never actually gets answered. And when I ask politicians what sustainability means, I've asked 2 of them, Todd McClay and the trade negotiator CEO, Vitalis. Couldn't answer my question. And it says in the Collins Dictionary, of economic development, energy sources, etc., the ability to be maintained at a steady level without exhausting natural resources or causing severe ecological damage. Okay, so that's sustainability. If you don't have ecology, you don't have profit. So in the end, when I look at our business and I have converted from arable, 30% of our farm, back to sheep and beef, not because it was more profitable, but it was more sustainable. So if we can use very, very little fertilizer, good grazing management, we can go for thousands of years. That's our aim. Because unless you can go for thousands of years, you're not sustainable. And so if we hit the wall with those graphs, which Wallace was talking about, we are all toast. Now, there's some harsh realities, and it's physics.
Hamish, I'd argue, and as I think John did in his address, that grazing animals are seen as evil by many people and not sustainable. How do we get that message across to the wider community that actually, and as Frank showed as well, that there are benefits from grazing animals. How do we get that message across?
From our the answers are very clear. I mean, the ruminants of the world, the bison, have been going for eons of years, well before we were around trying to control things. Like, but media. It's the media control the narrative, and all we're doing as industry groups, as farmers, is defending. And so my solutions to the barrage of regulation and ideology is say, let's invest into agroforestry on our hill country. Like, if you put agroforestry through the hundreds of thousands of hectares in New Zealand's hill country, A, you'll have all the trees planted that you need. B, you'll carry on producing food. C, you'll have profitability. And at the end of it, you'll have a wonderful shade, shelter, land stability, list goes on, outcomes. So I'll leave it here.
So,
You want an answer to how?
how are we going to tell the world that?
Yeah, look, certainly media has a big part to play, informing our New Zealand public and actually get them on side. We actually get better credit, as in farmers get better credit for our practices offshore than we do onshore. And it's embarrassing, and it's almost annoying, quite frankly. And it's driven, dare I say it, by some very vocal minority groups. And my view is they need to get out in the real world and see what goes on. Now, how do we, so we need to change that narrative. So it would be great to get the New Zealand public on board, make them understand that we are actually as good or better than some other practices around the world. And this is a little bit of a shot at our cooperatives. They will push the narrative if it suits them for their marketing purposes. And I find that annoying too.
I think Siobhan made the comment that we've got to have outcomes as well. We've got to actually say, this is evidence that they're doing a good job.
Yeah, great discussion. I agree with Dylan on we need to move to, from quantity to quality. We know enough now that correlates with quality outcomes. Since moving in this direction of adopting soil health principles, Dylan and myself have by default been moved into the top 5 to 10% of lowest emitters in Fonterra. So there's a huge correlation there. Someone asked me the other day if I would have gone slower next time and transition away from synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, neonicotinoids, overgrazing, etc. And I said, no, I would go faster. And yeah, I guess I've got my father to lean on because he's been through the tough times of the 80s. So it's like a little bird in my ear all the time. So yeah, we're just very pleased we made these changes when we did to soften the impacts of, well, global issues. And I guess that's a big thing. We need to think global but act local. And what's happening here in New Zealand, I think, will still play a huge part in commodity production, because as other agricultural systems around the world start to falter and fracture, as water constraints come onto other continents, we're going to be a food basket down here.
I think though there's if I can be devil's advocate here, and just taking what Siobhan said about substantiating and having data to show that farmers grazing livestock is good. I think one thing I do hear from farmers is that those who have adopted like the regenerative process, etc., they want evidence that it's viable, and it's profitable. How are we going to get that information out there to say, hey, look, you can go down this path, and these are my books. Yeah, but a lot of farmers don't have that. Yeah.
I guess, yeah, Aligned Farms are doing really transparent work on that. Every farm is in a different position as well, successionally. Yeah, so I think it's farmers hold their figures quite close to them. And yeah, I guess over time, we've been farming for 150 years here a certain way, okay? So you can't just expect over 1 or 2 years to show me the data when this is potentially a generational shift away from high fossil fuel inputs, or, yeah, on this path of decarbonising.
Is there an opportunity for the old monitor farm system we had 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, where we have farmers expose themselves and open themselves up and they're monitored over several years? Is there an opportunity to run a system like that?
That's what I guess Frank's been trying to push us more and more to do more of this. So we've got a group in the South, and a lot of them in this room is Regenerate South, and it's an incredible journey the last few years, and I've really loved being in this room today, because we're all sharing experiences and being very open and frank about our views, regardless of what the presenter was presenting. That's what it's like in this group, and it's farmer to farmer. That's where I think the key part is, and like Siobhan's been great coming in the group and giving her experience and what she does, and we've got people like Rick who's got decades of experience and life experiences, and other younger people as well. So you've got a real diverse range of people within, and even people that are not farming, but they're not bringing there to market their product, because that's something we've made very clear. And now, I guess I'm not sure how it's happened, but Mark and I are talking with Fonterra, because we're through Regen, through a couple of people that are quite pro within the organisation. And so how can we sort of pressure point people within that organisation? So it's about working with big companies like that, and maybe other cooperatives as well within the other industries. And it just happened to align with the emissions thing they put out the other day, and Mark and I in the room, and just realised that, holy shit, we're actually in the top 5% of the emitters, and we're both Regen farmers. So there's a story in itself. And my suggestion to the people within Fonterra is that, why can't we start setting up a group within Fonterra farmers that just started off with in a region with maybe there's a few Regen farmers, and they were hoping to have a soil health, for example, and not use the word Regen, and just start it off small like that, and then maybe build it from that. But it needs to be farmer to farmer, not professionals trying to tell us what to do, or the co-op actually. Yeah.
Just for the audience's information, a few years ago, Beef and Lamb, or Meat and Wool Board, it was then, ran a system of monitor farms where there were farmers throughout the region, and they had a support group of advisors around them, and they would challenge them, give them ideas, and then their progress we monitored over multiple years. And they'd have field days. It was actually a very, very influential and great way of spreading information. So it sounds what Dylan is talking about. Maybe Fonterra might be the pros doing it. Very early days, yeah. Rick.
Neal, you're talking about measuring income, measuring outcomes. We all have a topographical bias, and my brother and I couldn't work out how much hay to put on the trailer, so we cut the grass in 1973, and we've been measuring it ever since. But that habit became on for 33 years. We've had trials of measuring against doing nothing. 70% of the industry's recommendations failed to be an economic gain for 3 consecutive years. One of those, I have 12 years, you asked for data. I have 12 years of the same 4 paddocks monitored for herbage. That's 48 different samples. Just by changing one word, fertilizer to fertilizing, I've dropped my expenses from $15 a stock unit to 60 cents. And I've proved that you do not need additional fertilizer if you're pedantic about your grazing. Now, we've backed this up with 100 square meters of superphosphate that we put on and compare that every year. The bottom line is we plate that. We've had pasture plates since 1993. There is no difference. And it is even worse than that. Where we put the superphosphate on, our carbon sponge is 20% less. What we've found over that time, that rainfall, water grows the most grass. And over the last 12 years, we are now at 60% of the rolling average we were 12 years ago. And you have to be careful. And what Hamish is talking about is that one word, sustainability, that was adapted in the 80s, but we need to change our language. That's our solution. And that is, I just gave you an example of changing from fertilizer to fertilizing, and it's the same from going from regenerative to regenerating. And right now we have got business models that are not fit for the purpose, as Simon is talking. And as Buckminster Fuller would say, dare to be naive, don't try and fix the old one, just invent a new one. And we have done that for an investment of 2 cents a kilogram. We're getting 20 cents back a kilogram on our wool, just out of the business of changing the business model. So I think that's where our potential is. And it's only during these hard times that we will look at ourselves and stop having these beliefs and replace them with facts.
The issue, John talked about it, and it's been mentioned here about some of the advice that's coming into the primary sector. Is it too narrow? Is it too narrow? Do we need to get some other people high profile, having the profile to pass on advice to farmers?
Neal, can I just go back to one of your other questions? How do we get support for farmers in New Zealand? One of the things we can do is, and all farmers can do that, is actually improve our soil carbon levels, the carbon sponge in our farms. And by doing that, we can mitigate climate change. And then we can become climate heroes. And wouldn't that be great if the farmers were actually the saviour of our nation?
But as John King pointed out, Louis Shipper doesn't think that we're, mind you, you'd say that some of the questions somewhere in the science is right, but whether or not there's whether or not that the carbon is we can absorb more carbon into our soils.
Look, Siobhan would be far more qualified. Yeah.
Oh, this. Oh, okay. This is the clicker.
Australia, before whites came to that nation, had organic carbon levels up to 30%. So we've got a long way to go before we get to 30%.
It's an awkward position.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, that's the one. So I just wanted to share some of the data from my farm. It's 15 years now of regenerative data. We went, quote, regenerative as you guys define it in 2007. Of course, that word wasn't invented then yet. But the reason I wanted to share it with especially the farmers here, is because I don't think you've got the confidence that even dairy farmers can increase their soil carbon, just because in New Zealand, the science shows that the soil carbon is not going up. And I do believe it's because of the management, and I believe it can, even though you're at higher levels. Yeah, he's just, so I'll just show a couple of slides and then take questions. So this, of course, it's a New York dairy farm, and a lot of farmers here have said, well, you know, your soils are different, you know, things are different, and it's not going to work here. And then, as a lot of people who know me have heard me say, well, you've got actually a transplanted ecosystem from Eurasia, just like we had in New York. Because when I looked up where all the plants that appeared in my farm after I started this different kind of management, they're all Eurasian. Not a single one was a native New York species. And they're all the plants you have in your verge, you know, the cocksfoot, the timothy, the lotus, red clovers, and the like. You know, this is a graph of 15 years of soil carbon data from my farm. And the top line, it might be hard to read in the tiny writing, but the top line is the data from our farm. And basically, we lifted the soil carbon about 3%. And the yellow line is the average dairy farm soil carbon on our soils in New York State. And notice that that's higher than the annual crop carbon, which is in the gray, which is the lower line. And that's one of the reasons that, you know, I'm so supportive of the pastoral farming industry here in New Zealand. And so this is just farm samples that we took as we were trying to, as my fertilizer salesman was trying to sell us fertilizer, he would sample our soils. So you could say they were independently done, except the one in 2017, which was done by the cooperative that was buying our milk, a company that was buying our milk. And it was pretty robust. They sampled 40 different areas on the grazing platform to get a composite for that sample. So we're really confident in that one. And the most recent sample, which was taken in 2022 and was sent to me by the guy that's managing my farm now. Yeah. So the soil organic matter has held at around 8.5%. It peaked at about 9%, and it's still 8.5%. And what this tells me is it's really contrary to a lot of the science in New Zealand, which says, you know, soil carbon goes up and down, but if you raise it up, it's going to fall down again. And, you know, as we found, according to that graph, it's kind of showing a trend up, and then it kind of levels off and stays up there. And so 8 or 9% soil organic matter, you know, that could be even low for parts of New Zealand. You know, this is what that paddock looked like, that soil test came from. But I think what Alan was trying to say is that carbon sponge is how the farmers are going to make the money, because you need carbon in your soil to hold the water for your irrigation, for your summer production, and especially as climate gets even more squirrely. And that's what John, the young farmer that's running my farm, he's still managing it regeneratively. And he said, thanks for the care that you passed on to us. And I think it benefits the whole picture, the whole farm picture, because this year with all the dry that we had, we didn't run out of grass and have to stop grazing. And that's where the farmer makes the money. And, you know, people say in New Zealand, we already have that high soil carbon, but this is the difference. You can bring your 10% soil carbon soils and deepen that soil carbon. These are, you know, just samples of sod I pulled, one on the right from a sheep pasture and the one on the left from, just some grown grass in my garden. But surely there's heaps of room for you to put soil organic carbon down deeper in the soil, and I think that's where it's at.
Well, there's two take-homes from today. One is what Frank was saying about methane, and what I'm hearing from you guys about soil carbon. But I'd say that there's not the research. Researchers aren't going down that way. You're working in isolation. You've got these theories and this evidence to prove it. But where's the research going in to say, well, hey, this turn, as Ellen said, turn farmers into carbon heroes?
Just to comment, one thing I've found with research is that if it doesn't favour the current political narrative, A, it doesn't get funded, and B, it's not supported. So that's just a couple of points I've noted. Just going back to your question about advisors, the comment I'd make about advisors is, what are they advising you on and who's paying their salary? Are the two comments I'd make about advisors, because farmers get inundated with advice and one sometimes has to question where that advice comes from and whose experience or knowledge is funding it. And I think that's... But again, where has that experience and knowledge come from? Even independent I guess what I'm saying is I've found that independent consultation is not necessarily as independent as it might seem. So you need to get advice and knowledge from somewhere. It's just how can you necessarily trust it all the time?
I think we've been asking the wrong questions. That's why we don't get any traction. So we just have this carbon tunnel vision. So the question is, methane bad, let's invest hundreds of millions of dollars in trying to reduce a natural system. Whereas let's ask the question, how do we improve our ecosystems? So how do we improve water holding capacity, the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the light cycle, all these cycles as part of our natural processes. And again, when I come back to, this is some research given to me by FAR, okay, so the Arable Foundation, so it's pretty good research. That is the difference in the organic matter of all those different, it's pretty clear to me. I'm not sure what else you want. So when we start going down the oats track or the more plant-based diets or plant-based agriculture, we end up getting less soil carbon and we end up burning more diesel. And so I'm confused. I really am. Somebody explain to me what I'm missing.
I was just making the comment to Ellen, if you actually look at the profitability of those things, it's almost in reverse. And so you can see why lots of money gets spent at the top of the table and not so much at the bottom. Question? Yeah.
Just like to make a comment. If you want to save carbon, stop using urea. Urea burns carbon. It's well documented.
I can't afford urea anyway, so it's a moot point for me.
Come, Callum. We've got some Zoomers. Hang on. So my question is, does anyone on the panel, in fact, anyone in the room, have a very clear idea about what the long-term strategy for ag in New Zealand is? I'm going to take a punt. The answer to that question is no. Now, we're our leaders who are going to address that question and bring the right narratives to the table, not the ones we might be currently getting pulled into.
I'll give that a crack. Because it's an interesting question and I ponder for my own business a bit. Looking at where I am now, obviously I've deemed that our current model is unsustainable. And so I'm looking at what are my options. Value add is certainly part of the solution, but I don't think it's enough of a solution. There's the carbon thing, which is a short-term cash flow solution, but again, I don't think that's a long-term solution. So I'm actually looking at diversification, so multiple income streams. So yeah, I'll have some pine trees. I'll have some pastoral animals for meat production. Ideally, it would be wonderful if I could have a return out of my wool. But I'm looking at some sort of, I use the word cash crop. Cash isn't perhaps the right word, but some sort of an annual crop that I can get a return on as well. So very much spreading my risk, but spreading my income streams. That's what I'm looking at. And for certainly the sheep and beef sector as it stands, it's going to be a challenge because growing crops on the type of country we currently farm poses some issues. But I think diversification is the solution for my business model anyway.
Yeah, and I think you're right. My little catchphrase is light, local, biodiverse farm systems. We shouldn't make this a binary conversation about whether it's plants or animals. It's neither of those. It's all of them, da, 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 da. And no carbon tunnel vision. That doesn't answer my question, though. That's a solution for you. My question was, what's the national strategy? And I'm suggesting there's people in the room here, you might be one of them, Simon, who are members of organisations who should be stepping up and leading that conversation, because where are we going to be in 2050? I mean, a succession plan is not 20 years, right? It's 500 years. What are we doing to protect my children's children, except they're not having children because they're terrified about what they're going into? How could I'm not sure if I want to be a grandmother, it's a bit soon, but hypothetically, if I did, how do I give them the confidence that we can do this? Because we've got a clear strategy. Who's doing that work?
Yeah, look, short answer is I'd agree. I don't think anyone is at the moment, but certainly it needs to happen. Hey, I'd love to be involved in that, but the one thing I've learned is you've got to be able to get yourself around the table. And if you don't necessarily follow public narrative, getting around that table currently is a real challenge.
Yeah, I'm part of a group called Future Farmers, and it's a bunch of under 30 sort of getting together and asking some of those big questions. And it's sort of like a politically diverse group. And yeah, just already in like 2 years since our inception, have made quite good steps to trying to get a seat at the table at, you know, the Commissioner for the Environment or whatever. And it's just, yeah, we've got a manifesto that's out. I think a few people in this room might have read it. Would invite anyone to go onto the Future Farmers website and read that. And if there's something in there that bugs, make a comment on that, because we sort of are getting together as a group and going through that. But yeah, we're sort of breaking down that question. And one of the big work streams is at least focusing on the food system, like a national food system. There's certain organizations that are working on that. And it's just like, how do you actually make that from a plan or an idea to something that we're sort of cohesively working on as a sector?
Yeah, I think you're right, Helen. We need to feed our own people first. And that's going back to quality over quantity again. But yeah, I think that I had something on the end of my tongue. Around the children, I think we're dumping so many toxins and chemicals into our biosphere that honestly, we're going to be infertile anyway. So to be honest, farm systems need to change dramatically if we think we're going to have a chance. But really, like what Zeb's talking about, bioregional food hubs, like the Longwood Loop, regional food systems that we can actually feed ourselves local produce. So potentially farms will be smaller and obviously more diverse, because we're not going to be able to afford these inputs. So we're going to need more animals, like Hamish mentioned recently. We'll need more animals, but they'll be more evenly spread, and they'll be recycling nutrients, reducing the need for these excess costs coming in. Yeah, we just need to really build back resilience in our systems. I've witnessed generations through our farm from obviously my ancestors came in here in 1844. They lived here for 2 years before other colonizers came. And that's Anderson's Bay today, the colonial name. And back on the farm where we ended up at Warra South, I've watched the generations through the time go from small, diverse farms where one waste stream fed into, it was an input for another system, okay? We've simplified systems so much that we're totally lacking resilience. So we need to really have a massive rethink.
I think Dylan's got something.
First, I'd like to answer a little bit to your question, Helen, and something I probably should have thought about after your original question, Neil, is one thing that maybe that Sheree and I have been thinking about, obviously, is debt level in ag is massive, and it's massively limiting to what we can do on farm. So I guess what we've been doing is trying to get rid of debt as fast as we can, and we've been doing that the last few years successfully. Still got debt there, but what we're finding from doing that, it actually opens up so many opportunities, because now we've got cash flow, because we're not throwing all that money that we're making into interest payments and other things. So, and I know that's hard to hear when some of you in here may be loaded up with debt, particularly if you're younger. It's hard, but also not on top of that, we need to think differently about how we choose to invest. And for generations, we've been, and this is part of my thing as well, we wanted to get our own farm for ourselves and not have anyone under. And we've been involved in equity partnerships for a couple of decades, and we've got our own farm now, of course, but wouldn't think twice about going, we'd certainly go back to another equity partnership if it had to be that way. But there's so many different ways of, we have to think about how can we accumulate capital to actually still do what we want to do without having the pressure of debt all over us. We don't need debt actually to operate, and it gives us a multitude of opportunities to do different things. So, for example, we're going against the grain, or certainly hardwired with me, which is growth. In the dairy farming industry, it's like how to get bigger and bigger. We went up to 1,500 cows, and then we had 3 farms at one stage, and that's when the GFC hit, and we went down the Googler. So that was our hard lesson. So now, and I'm trying to really convince myself it's the right thing to do, but we're looking at going down in numbers continually, down to 300 cows next year, and we're still to make that decision. We might make it on the way home tonight, possibly after today. But to be a self-contained unit, but if you ask a normal dairy farmer about, that would be going backwards. But when you do the numbers, actually, I make as much profit as I am at the moment with a big runoff down the road milking 400 cows. So, and on top of that, I've got more probably flexibility. I can do a better job. I know that I'll shift my farm regeneratively a lot faster by doing that than I would at the moment currently. And so, where I believe we'll be falling more into abundance from that move, not going backwards. And that's the paradigm shift that we're in, and a lot of us in this room are in. And that's a hard one to wrap your head around, a real hard one. And just leading on to that, like this is an example of bale grazing, which Mark Anderson, who inspired Sheree and I to do this, it's just an example of what we do with our springers on there. And I've done it in our situation where this is, if you look at the costs associated in comparison to monoculture winter grazing, just purely looking at the costs, this is more expensive. But when you bring in the grass growth that comes in, extra growth from this practice, as opposed to the dirt that's not growing grass when that crop's been eaten for 5 or 6 months until you grow grass again, this wins over just like that. And that's what that's a holistic view. And I just I've been texting with a guy, Dean, up in Canterbury, we convinced to do some bale grazing this year, and it was like a last minute thing before we had a field day at his place to show the bale grazing, because I was actually presenting a paper on it, and he did it, thankfully. And now he's done all the figures. He's blowing all this information out there to say how great it is, and it is. And he's done the financial figures in his situation, looking just under 400 cows. He's $70,000 better off in his system than he is from a monoculture. So that's another, you got to look at so many other things than just the cost of doing it compared to the cost of doing this. There's other things that come into it. So exactly, and you look at those cows there, and that's another example. There's a heifers on a sloped, a runoff with bale grazing. That's about 2 weeks after bale grazing post. You can see the grass coming away already, and that's the same paddock. What happens in those patches, which is the litter, growing probably a third to half a gear more than where the bale wasn't. So, and this is a regenerative practice, right? So, from that whole practice, we engage with ag research, and we've done a 3-year trial just finishing up now, and some of the people who've helped with that are in this room actually. And one of the key things we took out of that was this next graph. So this is all about nitrate concentrate, the leaching of nitrates. So the green line is the monocrop wintering system, and the soil armor, which is bale grazing, is the red. The other one's milking platform, which is fairly comparable. So that's massive. Plus it's cheaper.
Earlier question: how do we get this message out into the researchers and into the funders? So a friend of mine was working with a dairy consultant up in North Island. They wanted to look at production per cow and cost as opposed to the costs. They had all the data. They lobbied MPI for funding and to get it open the door. The door would not open to them. And it's been proven there's farmers all around the country using the system. So how do we get this across to the researchers and to the officials?
So, Neal, can I make a statement, I suppose? So one of our key tensions, and these guys are talking about on the ground, but to your point, so this is actually quite high level. So, our economic models are all about growth, and it's all about GDP. So it's not necessarily about how much profit these guys make. It's just as long as they stay there and everyone else clips the ticket. So actually the models, and that's where the tension lies, because actually what Dylan's talking about, what these guys are talking about, aren't models necessarily about, in this instance, growing GDP. It's actually about potentially status quo and actually creating value going forward. So actually the establishment is real tension for the establishment.
I think there's a question over here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. It's a comment and an open question. I mean, not a farmer, 20 years in New Zealand, in Wamaru, the center of the universe, of course. It's why? So, but for the past 45 years, I've been an entrepreneur. So things that you guys say about ups and downs, well, hey, I lost everything. I lost my country. So I feel that, but then I start to ask myself, you live in a stable country. You never had a military dictatorship. You never had more than, I don't know, 30% inflation per year. Argentina is having 142% as we speak. You will say that it's a bad year. Well, it says here that since 1944, they average 190% inflation. And in 1990, had 20,000% of inflation. Yes, thank you. Is that okay? Yes. Thanks. Anyway, crazy numbers, one country. Why I'm quoting that country? Because I believe that in one way or other is a competitor for New Zealand in certain areas. I'm not taking it as an example, quite the opposite. As happened, but then the question is, New Zealand farmers, New Zealand has done, I can challenge that New Zealand are the most productive of the world. I have some numbers, that's a different conversation. The question that I want to ask, we have been able to create very good co-ops. Fonterra set up the price in Uruguay. It's more important the voice of Fonterra than the voice of Joe Biden or whatever. However, New Zealand hasn't been able to create a bank. There is no cooperative bank which defends the land, the farmers that can, I mean, I came here 20 years ago. Kiwi Bank was very new. I'm a patriot, so I put my money there. In the past 20 years, Aussie banks took profits year on year. I mean, they're the most profitable banks in the world. I'm not challenging the banking system, which deserves. We are in a capitalist society. I can discuss that as well. I'm just asking, why on earth creative and innovative people like the farmers here or the entire system, instead of complaining about this and that, create a bloody bank? I mean, Rabobank tells you how to do things. But we have been talking about profit, profit, profit. Who takes the big chunk of profit? The financial system. I understand that. I've been on the venture capital industry. I mean, there are building societies in Southland. I can keep giving the examples. You would say, okay, building a bank is not trivial. Has been done. The guys from TSB in New Plymouth hasn't done a bad job. What stops New Zealand farming community, who has been very good building Fonterra in 20, 25 years ago, to build a bank owned by farmers or whatever? An open question.
Yeah, good point. We did.
They built ivory towers in Wellington. We ain't see the money or the building now. Farmers being directors of companies, to me, the only reason they should be there is to look after the farmer's interest. Most of them are not up to a high enough standard to be directors. And I could say that about CRT, I could say that about PPCS, I could say that about Alliance over time, all of them. The last thing we need is a cooperative bank. But we buy shares, Westpac or ANZ or whoever, then we get our share.
Yeah, we might.
Can I say something else here about these guys?
Oh, we're going to wrap it up pretty shortly. So, yeah. And Alan.
Took to the last speaker to talk about cash. You say you're struggling. The best thing you can do is make a profit. That then creates the money to pay off your debt, and you get to live the lifestyle you wish to become. And I think if you strive for excellence as a farmer, and it means production, profit, lifestyle, quality of your farm, etc., you will get there. So there's a saying, if you try and do it better, you'll get better. But if you keep getting better, you'll get closer to best.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Yeah, you sure? Okay, so we might close up now if that's okay. So I hope it's an enjoyable session. I certainly enjoyed the hearing all their various opinions and thoughts. I think there's some real challenges out there, and I think that a lot of those challenges are just getting through the process, getting through the regulatory system of saying, hey, here's some options here that we can look at, and so very enjoyable. So thank you all very much for your contribution, and I hope you all had an enjoyable day. I certainly have. Thank you.
I just had one last response for you, Neal. You asked a couple of times about how do we get the message out, and I think we really want to get just like a huge social media marketing team and push it towards Frank. You know, get him on TikTok, get him on YouTube, because every time I've heard Frank speak, I've been really inspired and enlightened and made aware of a bigger dynamic of the farming sector. So yeah, just cheers, Frank, and cheers for organising these awesome events.